Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the People's Health Alliance North America, while we're interviewing people from our directory. Today, we have with us Isabel Frankel, a practitioner of homeopathy, and I'm incredibly excited for this conversation because homeopathy is something I've always been on the fringe of, but never actually fully understood or learned about. So hopefully, we can all learn together in this conversation. Thank you for being here with us, Isabel. And as I kind of discussed before we get into where your career is now, let's kind of take a few steps back and talk about how you got to where you are today. And so usually I've been asking this question as if we're going to go pretty way back to when you were in your high school, college years. What did you envision for your life, for yourself? It doesn't have to be too specific, but anything you can remember in this moment.
Well, good morning to you, Jordan, and thank you again for this invitation. I'm very honored to be here with you. So if I go back in time to when I was really young, I was really good in math. I was a good math student. And so I kind of envisioned myself. I had a small vision. It wasn't a big one. And it was just to be a math teacher. And that was as far as it went. And when I went off to college, which first was in Buffalo, New York, State College, because I grew up in New York, and I became a math major and then took some education classes, figured I'd be a high school math teacher. And then I just didn't like being in Buffalo anymore. So I had met somebody in some summer job who said, "Oh, you can be a transfer student in Montreal at McGill." And I didn't even know what McGill was. So I went there for a semester and started studying some Canadian politics because that was part of the program. And then I transferred. I transferred from Buffalo, became an official student at McGill, and graduated from there in the 70s. And I graduated with a degree in math and psychology because at that time, in order for me to be an education major, I would have had to stay in school a lot more years, and I didn't want to do that. The Canadian system's a little bit different. It's much more intense. So I was a math major, and even that I couldn't do full time because the math department was extremely challenging, let's just say. It was a lot easier in Buffalo. So I became a math/psychology major. And while I was at McGill, I met this student who was doing summer jobs in Puerto Rico. She had a summer job in Puerto Rico. She was a pre-med student and wanted to teach in this learning disability clinic. So she said, "Why don't you come with me one summer?" So I went to Puerto Rico in between my regular semesters at McGill, and I started just teaching math in this learning disability clinic. And I went there for 3 summers until I graduated. And then I ended up leaving McGill, leaving Montreal, which is, extremely cold, and living in Puerto Rico for 3 years, which is
Wow.
extremely hot. And that's when I started learning some Spanish, teaching at an American school. So, it was all English speakers, but I was studying Spanish on the side. And ended up at my last year that I was teaching in Puerto Rico, I ended up enrolling in the University of Puerto Rico and taking a lot of the same math courses I had already taken in English, and I took them in Spanish because I wanted to learn the vocabulary. So from there, I ended up somehow meeting someone who was offering this bilingual program in the University of Puerto Rico. So I did that my very last summer for I don't know, 2 months. And it was a very intense program, and I was the only American in the program. Everyone else was native Puerto Rican. And we studied everything. It was supposed to be for bilingual teachers, but we studied everything from the poetry to literature to salsa to, the language, politics. They were very immersed in politics. They were what we call independentistas. They were very supportive of the independence of Puerto Rico from the United States. So I kind of got involved with that crowd. So from there, somehow I made my way back to the States, but I didn't want to go back to New York, and I settled in Boston.
Mm.
Because at that time, Boston University was offering a master's program in bilingual education. So I decided to do that. I met up with the person who became my advisor. He was a science teacher from Puerto Rico and also very immersed in politics. So we became very good friends. He was my advisor. And at the time, I started teaching in the Boston Public Schools in the bilingual program. And I lasted there for 3 years until Proposition 2.5 came along, and then I was just, let go. But during that time, I was teaching in Spanish. Even my homeroom was totally in Spanish. It was just total Spanish. And I was teaching math, algebra, and pre-algebra, and geometry. Even though I was teaching in the Spanish-speaking program, there were also other programs going on at the school. At that time, bilingual education was very, very accepted, I would say much more than it was later on. And there was a big Haitian population there. And so I befriended a lot of the Haitian teachers and then became interested in learning Haitian Creole. So I went to this Creole Institute at Indiana University one summer. It was the summer of 1980, actually, and I became immersed in Haitian Creole. And I remember at the time beginning to learn that language because it was my third language at that point. I got so confused. Like there would be moments in time where my brain would just stop because I couldn't think of the word in English. I couldn't think of the word in Spanish. And I certainly at that time didn't know enough Creole. So I understood, I had an inkling to what it must be like for people that are learning new languages and just can't, figure it all out in the beginning. So I ended up learning some Haitian Creole and at that institute, meeting my first husband, who was there from Haiti to learn English at that institute. And so we became that in the beginning, very good friends. We ended up marrying in the summer of 1981. I came back to Boston. He came back with me. And because I was losing my job in Boston, I ended up getting a job in Cambridge. So fast forward, I'm in the Cambridge Public Schools for almost 30 years as a bilingual teacher, teaching math, but I was teaching in English, but to the bilingual
Gotcha.
population. And so it was not just Haitians and Spanish speakers. I had people from when we had 80 countries represented in Cambridge Region Latin. It was just like in the United Nations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
So
sense.
it was
Honestly,
it was just um, it was almost like a school within a school.
no, and that alone has brought up so many questions in my mind. So I'm going to try to get as many are going to be recall as
Sure.
possible. And I'll ask this actually in a two-parter just so I don't forget the second half of it. My first question is, this is kind of something that's come up in a few of my other interviews, is that do you feel like you went into a career in math simply because it was what you're good were good at growing up? So like then that's what you do. Is that kind of where how that unfolded, just that aspect of things?
I think in a lot of ways it did, Jordan. And I think I got to a point where I reached my ceiling. I tried to do a master's in math. I couldn't. I just didn't feel like I had the brain power to
Sure.
be in this total theoretical world. But I kind of fell into it because I thought I was good at it. But I also loved it. I mean, you see
Mhm.
the picture behind me was done by a geometry student. This was
Mhm.
for a geometry project, and I loved it. I loved her work so much. This is like over 40 years ago, and I had it framed professionally, but it was all done with compass and pencil and just some colors. And so I saw the beauty of math,
Yeah.
and I remember I had a professor at University of Puerto Rico. I'll never forget because goes back into the 1980s. And she was teaching a class in math education. And she used to say, you have to love what you're teaching. And she would say, La matemática es bella. It's beautiful. See the beauty in it. So I got to that point too, where I did see the beauty in it and I did appreciate that. But it got to the point where I don't think I want to do this for the rest of my life.
No, and that actually brings up a two-part too. And just speaking from personal experience, it's funny because math and science were the lanes I was in mostly as a kid, and so those are the areas I
Ah.
developed the most in. But completely understand math gets to a certain point where you're like, this isn't even math anymore, so this is no fun. This is way too, So I understood getting to that point, that's for sure. But also I guess my other question is, once you are now retrospectively able to look at, your earlier career, your early experiences, the places you've moved to, your 30 years of teaching. Do you see how that kind of guided or unfolded or launched you off for where you are today and what you're specifically doing? Did you see like the little gifts in that and the little compass directions there?
Well, absolutely. To quote one of these workshop leaders when I was experimenting a little bit in shamanism, and I remember she would always say at the beginning of every workshop, everything you've done up to now in your life has prepared you for this moment. And the words still always ring in my ears. And yes, because right, A leads you to B, B leads you to C. There's some math there, right? There's a logical path. This person connected to that person. And, the years I was living in Puerto Rico, I was very close to nature. I was extremely close to nature. I would go off into the mountains and just feel like that, like we weren't separate, so that kind of cosmic consciousness feel, I think, was planted during that time for sure. And that certainly was the beginning of me thinking of things in a different way, for
You know,
sure.
and I think just your exposure to multiple cultures is huge just
Yes.
because
Yes.
I'm not going to make this gross sum to all of us, but I feel like us as Americans a lot of time have a very limited view and a very American-centric perspective, and therefore it is kind of harder for us to understand not only like the cultural divides, but just the things that the perspective that other cultures see in which that we don't. And I think that culture shapes our medicine. It is a very American perspective to see the world as separate, to see us as higher, to see things in this perspective, and therefore medicine kind of comes at us that way. It almost seems hierarchical, it seems separate, it seems kind of disempowered, and it's very tied to our culture and even Puerto Rican culture. Because I have a lot of Puerto Rican friends, and even some Haitian friends. Is that I feel like so many more indigenous-based cultures, if that's the term that's best, they're so connected not only to each other communally, but to other things as well that the responsibility of health feels more of a responsibility of all. Does that come out in correct words when I say that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you go to Haiti, the medicine doctors, or we say ongon, which is like a voodoo kind of medicine doctor, they're all botanists. They know
Mm,
plants really well. If you have this menstrual pain, you go to this herb and this plant. And so this is something that's intricate. This is part of the culture. This is medicine. This is real medicine. And I think, and if we can appreciate that, I think we'd be much further along than we are right now. And
yeah.
certainly, yeah. I mean, I've been to Haiti a couple of times, and the last time that I was there, which 2006, and I went with a group of homeopaths, and the purpose was to teach homeopathy to these doctors, and these doctors were so into it. I mean, they took over and they have mobile clinics and they practice and they learned the homeopathy so well and they embraced it because for them it's not a big deal because this is what they already do. It was a lot easier to work with Haitian doctors than it is to work with American doctors. Not in general, not everybody, of course,
Yeah.
but that was my experience. Yeah.
Well, no, me too, and it's one of those things that doesn't. I guess sad to me is the best worst word for most American culture in general. Is that if we took any of our lineages, yours or mine, and went back far enough, we'd find all these things in those as well. Like I'm Irish and African mostly, and if I went far enough back in my lineage, you would see the herbal medicine, you'd see this communal living, you'd see all these things. And unfortunately, I think that that was something we lost as our identity became just American, which again, nothing wrong with that. But I think we lost so much of those roots and connections. And so therefore, peoples who are still of their lands, I think have a little bit deeper connection to that pretty easily. Have you does that make sense of where I'm going with that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings to mind too, Jordan, when we're looking at a case, looking at a client comes to us, it's not just what the person's presenting in that moment in time, it's what came before, not
Mm.
even just before in their lives, but before that life, the past generations, grandparents, great grandparents, that's all part of the picture of who that person is. In fact, and that's what we do include when we're talking about homeopathic prescriptions. We have to include all of that. Otherwise,
No,
we're not doing justice.
that's huge. And of course, the Western medicine obviously asks your family history and what do your parents and so have, which I mean is also helpful and kind of adjacent to that, but I don't think it's as deeply rooted in that specifically. And so let's actually talk about how we got to homeopathy. I mean, that's pretty wild to me. You know, a 30-year career in something not even remotely adjacent, and now here you are today. How did that evolve into that?
Yeah. So along with the first marriage came some kids, two children that I have today. They're adults. But at the time, when my second child was born, my son, he was 10 months old and he started breathing really funny. And I had no experience with asthma. I had no idea what asthma was. But my husband at the time said, I think he has asthma. So took him to the doctor, pediatrician, and oh, well, we'll put him on this ventilator or whatever it was, Ventable. I don't remember the name, but and I said, how long? And he said, oh, forever. What? And something inside of me said, I don't think so. And at the
Mm.
time, there was a lady who lived across the street from us who was seeing this quote unquote healer. I think his title today is quantum healer. And I still actually see him from that time, from over 30 years ago. And she said, you might want to check this out. So I took my son, he was 10 months old, he was wheezing, to this doctor on the South Shore. And I had no idea what to expect. And I was nursing him at the time. And the first thing he said to me when I walked in the door was, what are you feeding him? What are you eating? And I'm like, really? And I told him, and he said, oh, this is all wrong. So he changed my diet completely. I was like angry at him at the beginning. But within 3 months, and then he had me give him, I think it was Moulin tea, and I had never heard of that at the time. He says to open up the bronchial tubes. So he was really into herbs and all this. And within 3 months, my son was off the medications. No turning back. So that was my first. And then I started going to see this person for my own health concerns. And he suggested that I read a book. It was written in 1986 called The Science of Homeopathy. He also suggested that I read the book by Anne-Marie Colburn called Food and Healing. And so that was my first introduction to homeopathy. I had no idea what it was. I had never heard of it before, but I had this book and I started kind of looking at it. And it ended up being one of the textbooks that I had to order for my homeopathy training in 2011.
Actually, if I can just cut you off real quick, I want you to continue this story, but something I want to point out that I think was just so great that you stated, because it's something I have patients ask their own primary care or doctor that prescribes something, which I'm just so happy you asked the question is I always ask my patients, ask their primary, like, so what's next after this? Like what, so yes, this is where you're giving me a treatment, then what, And a lot of time they're kind of like, well, this is just what you do forever. And I'm just like, is that not crazy? What else? Like that does not seem like a plan to me. Like that, this is it. So I'm so happy that that was the initial question you asked.
Right, right. And I was a young mother at the time, and but I just knew something inside of me was, no, this isn't quite right. This isn't quite right. So that was kind of, I think the seed was planted at that time. And then I took my both of my kids to a physician, a homeopathic physician in Boston, which is very uncommon. In Europe, there are more physicians that are homeopaths, but not so much in the States. And so she guided us through the vaccinations. She helped us with that and some other childhood illnesses. So I started giving them these remedies. And, slowly over time, I just started learning a little bit more about it on the side and started thinking about my own health in terms of homeopathy. So little by little, it was there. And it wasn't until though I was ready to retire from teaching in 2011, well, 2010 was when I started thinking about it. And it came to me, oh, I can study homeopathy. So when I retire from teaching, I can become a homeopath. It took a few years for that idea to really, I think, come along. But once it came along, it was just clear without any doubt, this is what I need to do next. And that's what I did. I checked out a few schools and found one in Boston, which was in person, which was great at that time. We had in-person learning. And then I just did I think it was one weekend every month for 3 years. And then simultaneously, because to be certified as a homeopath, you have to have a certain amount of hours of school, you have to have a certain amount of hours of clinical time, and you have to have and a lot of people don't know this, you have to have 3 years of anatomy and physiology, pathophysiology, and I took all those courses at the New England School of Acupuncture, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
The courses for the acupuncturist, and here I was the only non-acupuncture student in the class, but I learned a lot.
No, that's huge. And it actually makes me want to stay, and I don't know how much you're even aware of this right now, because I kind of want to stay in the realm of education as of right now, because it's something I'm personally seeing because I am paying a lot of attention to this world. Actually, education and all of these modalities is kind of falling right now. A lot of schools are closing, a lot of funding is getting set back. And it seems like there's just an overarching issue in education and all these modalities that are so incredibly helpful. That being said, that's not just an alternative modality thing. I think that's the education system as a whole is failing in higher education. So I think that that's kind of where it's going. Have you ever contemplated, thought, and dreamed or envisioned where would be the best direction for us to go in that? I know it's a big on the spot question. You don't need to give me a straight answer, but have you ever even just thought about the education of the type of modalities we do and how
Mhm.
do we kind of bring that back to the forefront?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, my main source now is Zoom because
Mhm.
since 2020, I enrolled in a school in the Netherlands and I've been taking their classes. It's all by Zoom. That's my first Dutch teacher. My second Dutch teacher, the same thing. It's all by Zoom. The meetings, the study groups, the book club, the webinars. They do have some seminars where you can go in person, and one is in I think in Italy every September. Maybe next year I'll go. So there are some opportunities to do things in person, but I think for homeopathy it's a little different than a massage therapist, right? Or an acupuncturist, where I'm not sure how that would work. I know, for example, when I was doing a lot of shamanic work, I began with in-person workshops. And I know people now have done it on Zoom. And I've done a couple of just short little snippets on Zoom. It didn't feel the same to me. I can't smell the sage and all of the important parts of the ceremony that I think Zoom kind of just doesn't. So I'm not sure if it can substitute 100%. I think it's better than nothing for sure, but because I don't do a lot of hands-on things other than Reiki, but I have to say about Reiki, I find doing long distance Reiki for me more powerful than doing it in person when I'm
Yeah.
working on somebody.
And that's fair. And that's something that I did experience. So I actually started acupuncture school in 2020. That's that's
Oh,
the year I started. And that's actually the reason I started at that time was because actually the first 6 months of our program did go online. So we did learn like, theory and background and just a lot of the memorization type stuff could have been delivered in that format. And it was a love-hate relationship. Some people absolutely hated it, some people loved it because there's a freedom and autonomy to be doing that. Like you could, be on the beach taking a class while also doing 10 other things and, trying to learn as well. So
true.
there is
Yeah.
some freedom to that. And for me, I have my computer right before I go to work, take my class, and then like work immediately following. It was nice that I was already at my location of work. So, I mean, there
Mhm.
was a lot of things that made accessibility better, but of course, things can't be 100% online, and it does take away some of these personal connections. But I have heard a lot of people even say with stuff like energy work that, sometimes remote or online has its own nuance and flavor and sometimes does work out as well. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm a big believer it's neither an all or nothing. It probably is, a combination of the two on that. And with
Yeah.
that being said, do you currently, this is kind of bringing us perfect segue, do you currently practice mostly in person or are you online? Where are you at today as far as
It's all online.
okay.
It's absolutely all online. I mean, I see somebody in Vancouver, and in Texas and in Colorado. And I had a couple of clients from Europe in the past. So, yeah, I mean, the people that live locally, we still do it online. It's just easier at this point. I find that I'm used to it more now.
Yeah.
So, could I go back to in person? I probably could, but at this point in time, I like doing it by Zoom. If I were doing a clinic situation, then it would be different. And I haven't done that in a while because besides the clinics we offered in Haiti, I was doing some volunteer clinics in Boston for a while. And that felt good and right to do that in person. So I
So
think,
actually, that may actually be my next question because in Chinese medicine, our diagnostic criteria does have a few nuances depending on how you practice. That in person is almost like necessary. Sometimes we take pulses, sometimes we do abdominal palpation. There's things along those lines to help with the actual diagnostic criteria. In the
mm,
system of homeopathy that you learn, is like 100% of the diagnostic criteria able to do remote, or is there one or two things you do just have to kind of keep
mm.
for that reason?
For the way I practice, it can be totally remote. Yeah, because I'm not a physician practicing homeopathy. If I were, it would be a different situation. I have a very close friend slash colleague who lives in Colorado, and my husband at this point in time still lives in Colorado. When I was visiting him a lot, I would spend some time with her in her practice.
Mm,
And so I can see, as a physician, right, she's got her hands on the person and she's also prescribing some of the homeopathic remedies or the plant extracts. So for her practice, I would think it needs to be mostly in person. Although when COVID hit and she didn't see people in person, she was working with them remotely by doing energetic work because she also does
mm,
osteopathy. So I really think it depends on the particular situation. I'm not sure if I go back to doing any kind of clinical work in a clinical setting, if I would want that to be remote, because I like the idea of a community, building a community to an in-person structure as being part of the practice as well.
And I think that that's where at least I personally envision the future of healthcare. I do think that 2020 benchmark, it did go dramatically to everything remote. And now even sometimes, like I just had my mom tell me that they want her yearly physical to be remote. And I was just like, I don't know if we should do that remote. Maybe that should still be in person. So I swing too far one way is definitely not the greatest thing in the world. But again, it does offer some more accessibility and some more convenience. However, I'm again very strong feeler in this hybrid model in which remote services are great to offer and great to have, but depending on how you practice, some in-person stuff might might be required to say the least.
Yeah, and I'm also a believer in multiple modalities. So, I might say to a client who has extreme anxiety, okay, these remedies should be helpful, but you know what? A zero balancing practitioner would be helpful to you. Somebody that puts their hands on you and goes to those special places in the bones where you're holding your trauma. So I like to have more than just one level in whatever we're looking at, for depending on, of course, the person's financial means, right?
No, but I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's also an important fact too. And it's one of the, I don't want to say darker sides in complementary health spaces. A lot of them have gotten a little bit competitive and ego based, as everything can get that way. I know with personal experience, there are some practitioners that are almost against of using this communal type of healing, like you just said, and recommending out and stuff like that, because they're almost a little bit territorial. And I do strongly believe that we need, I mean, look at our country needs a lot of help as far as health goes. The more the merrier, honestly. The more practitioners working with people, the more people that people can see it at one time or add these modalities to compound them. I'm a strong believer that, especially some of these more energetic based things like acupuncture, like Reiki, and all these healing modalities, they're a little more subtle. So with these subtler medicines, you might want to, add two or three together to get that synergistic effect in order for us to move through a lot of the things that we're going through. So
Mhm.
I do wonder also, how do you feel and this is, coming from my own perspective, bridge that gap of competitiveness in this alternative complementary space? Have you experienced any of that personally? I guess let me start there as
Mm.
far as like some competitiveness in these spaces.
It can be very subtle. The name of the school that I went to was the Teleosis Homeopathic Collaborative. So the name in itself defined the approach to how we were taught. We were taught, for example, in the student clinic, we worked as a team to
Mm.
come up with the prescription. So we worked always in conjunction with each other. And doctors do that all the time, right? They call on each other. Hey, what do you got for this? And my doctor friend will do that, and I'll do that with her. We'll pick each other's brains about what medicine we practice. And I think we learn from each other. So I don't feel that much of that because I choose not to practice that way. And I choose to surround myself with colleagues that don't practice that way. So we have a group that meets every month. We call ourselves the practitioners group, and we're all graduates of the same homeopathy school. And we present cases to each other. We sometimes we'll text each other. What do you do for this? What do you think about that? And so there's that collaboration was built into our education, and it's built into the way we practice now. So we embrace that. And also other modalities as well. I mean, for example, have a client who's an acupuncturist. And so she was working with me for homeopathy, and then she sent some of her acupuncture clients to me, and they're still seeing her for acupuncture. So it's not mutually exclusive.
No,
You don't want to overkill and do too many things at the same
yeah.
time. Then you don't know what's working. But I think, and that kind of goes to the question of choice, right? As long as the client, the patient has the choice to make those decisions and choose that healing path, whatever that is, whatever form that takes, then we're good.
No, I'm grateful I asked that question because your answer was great. I'm happy to hear that the school's even called collaborative because I do think just starting the foundation there allows for that to just kind of already be in your mind that we're working together. Of course, that's the entire paradigm that the People's Health Alliance is trying to move into. I think that I have come from educational systems that were definitely framed a lot more Western medicine, like, to fit into that box in order to be delivered that way in order for standardized testing and all that stuff, of course, too. But I think that they were framed in a paradigm that we're kind of shifting out of that were more, yeah, I guess Western paradigm, which can be more competitive and less collaborative in some sense. And I think we are moving towards this more integrative model, which I'm very excited to see. I guess that being said, though, I'm happy to hear about your practice. I think it's awesome that things are mostly being done remote because I think that also gives the courage to a lot of people to know that they can practice the way that you are, because I know that sometimes that's a barrier to people even practicing is the way in which they can. And I think that my last question for you to kind of lead things off on is where do you just see your future practice? Where do you see your future in collaborating with other people? And where are things kind of going for you?
Yeah, good question. So, a lot of things are going on right now. Along with homeopathy, I also practice gemotherapy. We call them the plant extracts. And so, there's a school that's just been started called the Gemmell School. And the founder lives in New Hampshire, where she's growing a lot of these plants, trees, and shrubs to make the Gemmells homegrown. And so I'm on the advisory group of that school. So it would be to train people that want to practice or add gemotherapy to their practice. And in addition to that, there is the possibility of a doctoral program. So one of the Dutch teachers that I've been working with since 2020, he is being sponsored by this homeopath in the United States called, she's Karen Allen. And so I'm part of her platform and I take classes with him via her platform and I'm in her study groups. And she and Evald are talking about offering a doctoral program of homeopathy in the United States. And he would be the main person behind it because it's his methods that we're studying right now, which are very Hahnemannian. And so that's kind of the direction I can see myself going in because I love the kind of work that he's doing with homeopathy. I think the direction that he's taking us in is basically going back to exactly what Hahnemann really intended it for us to practice. So I kind of see that as the possibility, doing more study, doing deeper study, continuing with my private practice, maybe even doing some more community work around where I live in my neighborhood, because it's a very diverse neighborhood where I live in Boston. Like we go back to, the beginning, A leads to B leads to C. It seems like this is the path. And they say that really to become an accomplished homeopath, you need to be doing it for 30, 40 years. So there's so much more for me to learn. I've only been doing this since 2011. That may seem like a long time for some people, but it's one of the deepest and most complicated and challenging sciences I have ever been exposed to. That's one thing I can say about that.
And I'm glad you connected that dot before I did about the full circle moment of this interview, talking about starting off in education and how that might set you off for where you're going. And sounds like you might be getting back into that realm, which is very, very cool. I think the last thing that I want to leave on topic wise, so for me conceptually, homeopathy has been something, a word I've known probably my entire life, but I've never really known what it actually is until recently learning a tiny bit about it. What would be on the spot again? You're like Cliff Notes, 30-second, this is what homeopathy is, so we can use that to kind of explain to some people as just a jumping pad.
Sure. So homeopathy, right? Homeo, the same, patho, pathology. So if you think about something that could make you sick, right? It could be, or not necessarily make you sick, but maybe stimulate some certain types of symptoms. That in a healthy person. That same substance, when it's energetically prepared, meaning diluted and potentized, and the inner essence or that energy is freed, that same substance can cure. That's the idea of like cures like. So that which can create disease can cure disease when given in the energetic form. Because the bottom line is, in the homeopathic world, I like to say in the homeopathic world, disease is not material. Disease is caused by the dynamis, or the vital force, or the spirit, or chi, whatever you want to call it, that has been disturbed. That is really what disease is. It's not what's presented in the pathological report. It's the energy behind that in our system.
So it's almost like this prepared remedy or homeopathic is giving the body the energy to almost understand what's going on in it and therefore fix it in essence, I guess.
In a way, I mean, what it does is it actually presents what we call the symptoms of the artificial disease, and then the vital force mounts a response to that, and then that's what causes the disease to be pushed away. So it's almost like the two energies coming together. It's not anything material. It's the two energies coming together that are actually resolving this problem.
No, that makes a lot of
Totally
sense.
energetic.
And
Really.
so in that same question then, in homeopathic belief, I guess, and understanding, is it then our immune system that then takes care of it though? Is like that still a physical thing you discuss in homeopathy, or we don't even discuss that terminology, I guess?
Yes, for sure. Yes, but what drives the immune system, right? It's our energetic system, right?
Sure.
The immune system is down when our energetic system is down. So that's really the source of all this. And that's why we need to always look for the source. We always need to look at the reason for the visit. And behind that, behind that, behind that, behind that, it all needs to come together energetically.
And I really appreciate this conversation. I never know what direction these things are going to go into. And I feel like I even just personally learned so much. So I'm grateful for that part alone.
Thank
And I
you.
think that we know that you're on our directory so people can find you there. Are you still taking new people as far as right now goes?
Yeah, I am. And my sense about that is that whatever I'm studying, there'll be somebody out there that will need that. They'll find me, and that's the way it usually works.
I feel like that just, it's the universe workings. I feel like that all the time too. If start learning something new, I instantly see someone with that problem. And it's the beauty of that to say the least. Well, thank you so much for this interview, and people will be able to find you on the directory, and I'm sure we'll be having a lot more PHA adjacent conversations. So I just wanted to say thank you one more time.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It was a pleasure talking with you. Lots of fun.